One of my oldest decks is a mono blue polymorph deck centered around Jalira, Master Polymorphist. Originally printed in 2014's Magic 2015, this mono blue human wizard is a 2/2 for 3 and a blue that lets you reveal the top card of your library until you reveal a non-legendary creature and put it onto the battlefield by paying 2 and a blue, tapping her, and sacrificing a creature. While admittedly a bit mana intensive and usually requiring a full turn to pass before it can happen, the ability is really fun to build around and surprisingly open-ended. You can cheat out giant creatures like sea monsters or Eldrazi. You can build her around creatures that make tokens when they enter. You can build her as an off-color aristocrats commander. Or you can build her as a gambling simulator with good cards, bad cards, and everything in between. However you go about it, this commander has a lot of potential. Personally, I went with Eldrazi and Blightsteel Colossus type cards because my original plan for this deck was to be as high powered as I could make it. Though you absolutely do not have to go that route, jamming big sea monsters and big flyers and stuff with like Stormtide Leviathan in the list is going to be just as good. So just like any other polymorph deck, to cheat out your targets, they still need to be in your library. So powerful cards like Rhystic Study and Mystic Remora are actually not super helpful for this deck. At least not in my opinion, and depending on your particular build, may leave one of your most powerful cards stuck in your hand, unable to hit the table due to its high mana cost. This is why I personally believe for a deck like this, card selection is the way to go. I've loaded my deck with cards like Opt, Ponder, Preordain, Brainstorm, Portent, and Impulse. All to make sure I don't draw into the Pathrazer Vulamog, I go to polymorph straight out onto the battlefield. If you happen to have one already, or if it's in your budget, I highly recommend Sensei's Divining Top, as it's one of the best cards you can have in a Jalira list. Another scry engine I can't recommend enough is Nethery's Puzzle Ward. Getting to scry 1 to 4 cards before you draw for turn is incredible. At least for this deck, it's better to tuck away that big creature than to let it rot in your hand after all. I've gone on about the cards we hope to polymorph into and the cards that we're going to use to avoid drawing into them, but it's time to talk about what we're going to be sacrificing to put them onto the battlefield. Personally, I run a nice mix of token producers like Scuttletide, Thopter Spy Network, Talrand, Nuisance Engine, Retrofitter Foundry, Mirax, and Sharding Sphinx, who also happens to be a decent polymorph target in and of itself. I'm also running a few one-off token makers like Hard Evidence, Blade of Selves, Lazatep Plating, Flip the Switch, and Callous Dismissal. I highly recommend running some low-cost legendary creatures, especially ones that add extra value or protection, like Essior Wardwing Familiar and Caliphate Beloved of the Sea. And while I'm not currently running it, Hope Agirapur is a perfect include as sack fodder for Jalira's ability, that also happens to have a useful ability of its own. Speaking of sack fodder, manlands like Mishra's Factory, Mutavault, and Fairy Conclave are excellent for a polymorph deck, especially when you don't really need the extra mana late game or just don't happen to have anything else in a pinch. Mutavault and Mishra's Factory are especially good since they can turn themselves into creatures with no external mana sources. So we've covered the basic game plan and what we'll be using to get there, but the deck falls apart without Jalira. You could run cards like Proteus Staff and Polymorph as some sort of pseudo-redundancy, though I only recommend those if you don't mind flipping into your legendary creatures potentially. I personally cut it from my list because I found that I flipped too much into my legendary creatures that were not impactful enough for the mana investment. So instead I opted to load up on Protection. I'm running both sets of boots, Robe of Mirrors, Mystic Veil, and a host of cheap counterspells like Daze, Swan Song, Unwind, Arcane Denial, and Counterspell, all to keep Jalira safe and able to do her thing. Lastly, if you plan to give Jalira a try, I highly recommend packing Illusionist Bracers, Rings of Bright Hearth, and Lithoform Engine. For a relatively small investment, all 3 cards can help make Jalira net you an extra creature per activation. No matter what sort of creatures you're hoping to polymorph into, getting multiple is almost always going to be better. And of course, because her ability has generic mana in its cost, Training Grounds and Heartstones are essentially auto-includes. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed hearing me talk about one of my oldest commanders, and I hope you'll give her a try. She can be incredibly strong if fragile, or she can be a wacky fun roulette wheel of a commander. It's really up to you. Anyway, I hope to see y'all again real soon, and safe travels!